All right, y'all. This here's the story of Wali Dad, the simple-hearted. Now, here's a fairy tale from India. It tells of a simple-hearted old man who lives in a mud hut in the jungle. He is determined to be unselfish and share what he has with others. And in so doing, he finds that his unselfishness awakens such response that he is quite overwhelmed. Again and again, he gives away what he has been given, only to receive more in return. How is he able, with some help at last, to deal with the delightful but somewhat embarrassing situation is revealed in the course of the story. Now let's get on with it. Now once upon a time there lived in India a poor old bald-headed man whose name was Wali Dad Gunji, or Wali Dad the Bald. He had no relations but lived all by himself in a little mud hut some distance from any town. And he made his living by cutting grass in the jungle and selling it as fodder for horses. He only earned 5 halfpence a day, but he was a simple old man and needed so little that he saved up 1 halfpenny daily and spent the rest upon such food and clothing as he required. Now in this way he lived for many years until one night he thought that he would count the money he had hidden away in the great earthen pot under the floor of his hut. He set to work and with much trouble pulled the bag out onto the floor and sat gazing in astonishment at the heap of coins that tumbled out of it. What should he do with them all, he wondered. He never thought of spending the money on himself, for he was content to pass the rest of his days as he had been doing for so long. And he had no desire for any greater comfort or luxury. Try as he would, he could think of no way of spending the money. And at last he threw it all into an old sack, which he pushed under his bed, and then, rolled in his ragged blanket, he went to sleep. Now usually he slept without dreaming, but on this night he dreamed of a lovely girl. He woke early next morning with her face still in his mind, and staggering off with his sack of money to the shop of a jeweler whom he knew in the town, he bargained with him for a beautiful little gold bracelet. With this carefully wrapped up in his cotton waistband, he went to the house of a rich friend who was a traveling merchant and wandered about with his camels and merchandise through many countries. Now Wali Dad was lucky enough to find him at home, so he sat down and after a little talk he asked the merchant who was the most virtuous and beautiful lady he had ever met. The merchant replied that the Princess of Kaistan was renowned everywhere, as much for her beauty as for her kind and generous disposition. Give me one second. Then, said Wali Dad, next time you go that way, give her this little bracelet with the respectful compliments of one who admires virtue far more than he desires wealth. With that, he pulled the bracelet from his waistband and handed it to his friend. The merchant was naturally much astonished, but he said nothing and made no objection to carrying out his friend's plan. Time passed by, and in the course of his travels, the merchant at length arrived at the capital of Kaistan. As soon as he had the opportunity, he presented himself at the palace and sent in the bracelet, neatly packed in a little perfumed box he himself had provided, giving at the same time the message entrusted to him by Wali Dad. The princess could not imagine who had bestowed this present on her, but she bade her servant tell the merchant to return after he had finished his business in the city, so she could give him her reply. In a few days, therefore, the merchant came back and received from the princess a return gift of a camel load of rich silks, besides a present of money for himself. With these he set out once more on his journey. Some months later he reached home again, and at once he took the princess's present to Wali Dad. Great was the perplexity of that good man to find a camel load of silk tumbled at his door. What was he to do with these costly things? But presently, after much thought, he begged the merchant to consider whether he knew of some young prince to whom such treasures might be useful. Of course I do, the merchant said, greatly amused. From Delhi to Baghdad and from Constantinople to Lucknow, I know them all. There lives none worthier than the gallant and wealthy young prince of Nekabad. Very well, then, take the silks to him with the blessing of an old man, said Wali Dad, much relieved to be rid of them. The next time that the merchant journeyed that way, he carried the silks with him, and in due course arrived at Nekabad, where he sought an audience with the prince. When he was shown into his presence, he produced the beautiful gift of silks from Wali Dad, and he begged the young man to accept them as a humble tribute to his worth and greatness. The prince was much touched and ordered 12 of the finest horses for which his country was famous to be delivered over as a return present for Wali Dad. The prince also gave the merchant a munificent reward for his services. As before, the merchant at last arrived at home. The very next day he set out for Wali Dad's house with the 12 horses. When the old man saw him coming in the distance, he said to himself, "Here's luck, a troop of horses coming. They are sure to want quantities of grass, and I shall sell all I have without having to drag it to the market." Thereupon he rushed off and cut grass as fast as he could. When he got back, he was greatly discomfited to find that the horses were all for himself. At first, he could not imagine what to do with them, but after a while, a brilliant idea struck him. He gave 2 to the merchant and begged him to take the rest to the Princess of Kaistan, who was clearly the fittest person to possess such beautiful animals. The merchant departed, laughing, but true to his old friend's request. He took the horses with him on his next journey and eventually presented them to the princess. This time the princess sent for the merchant and questioned him about the giver. Now the merchant was usually a most honest man, yet he did not quite like to describe Wali Dad in his true light as an old man whose income was 5 halfpence a day and who hardly had clothes to cover him. So he told her that his friend had heard of her beauty and goodness and had longed to lay the best he had at her feet. The princess then took her father into her confidence and begged him to advise what courtesy she might return to the man who persisted in making her such presents. "Well," said the king, "you cannot refuse them. The best thing you can do is to send this unknown friend a present so magnificent that he is unlikely to be able to send you anything better, and so will be ashamed to send anything at all." He then ordered that in return for each of the 10 horses, the princess should send back 2 mules laden with silver, and thus in a few hours the merchant found himself in charge of such a splendid caravan that he had to hire a number of armed men to defend it against robbers. He was glad indeed to find himself back again in Wali Dad's hut. "Well now," Wali Dad exclaimed, as he viewed all the wealth laid at his door, "although I can well repay that kind prince for his magnificent present of horses, yet you have been put to great expense. Still, if you will accept 6 mules and their load, and will take the rest straight to Nekabad, I shall thank you heartily." The merchant felt handsomely repaid for his trouble, and though he wondered greatly how the matter would turn out, he made no difficulty about it. As soon as he could get things ready, he set out to Nekabad with this new and princely gift. This time the prince, too, was embarrassed, and he questioned the merchant closely. The merchant felt that his good name was at stake, and while he had intended not to carry the joke any further, he could not help describing Wali Dad in such glowing terms that the old man would never have known himself had he heard them. Now the prince, like the king of Kaistan, determined to return a gift that would be truly royal and that would perhaps prevent the unknown giver from sending him anything more. So he made up a caravan of 20 splendid horses, caparisoned in gold embroidered cloth, with fine morocco saddles and silver bridles and stirrups, Also 20 camels of the best breed, which had the speed of race horses and could swing along at a trot all day without getting tired. And last, 20 elephants with magnificent silver howdahs and coverings of silk embroidered with pearls. To take care of these animals, the merchant hired a little army of men, and the troop made a great show as it traveled along the roads of India. When Wali Dad saw the cloud of dust which the caravan made in the distance and the glitter of its appointments, he said to himself, "By Allah, here's a grand crowd coming. Elephants too. Grass will be selling well today." With that, he hurried off to the jungle and cut grass as fast as he could. As soon as he got back, he found that the caravan had stopped at his door, and the merchant was waiting, a little anxiously, to tell him the news and to congratulate him upon his riches. "Riches!" cried Wali Dad. "What has an old man like me with one foot in the grave to do with riches? That beautiful young princess now, she'd be the one to enjoy all these fine things. Take for yourself 2 horses, 2 camels, and 2 elephants with all their trappings, and present the rest to her." The merchant at first objected and pointed out to Wali Dad that he was beginning to find these embassies a little awkward. Of course, he was himself richly repaid, but still he did not like going so often, and he was getting nervous. At length, however, he consented to go once more, but he promised himself never to embark on another such enterprise. So, after a few days' rest, the caravan started off once more for Kaistan. The moment the king of Kaistan saw the splendid train of men and beasts entering his palace courtyard, he was so amazed that he hurried down in person to inquire about it. He was dumbstruck when he heard that these were another present from the princely Wali Dad to the princess, his daughter. He went hastily off to her apartments and said to her, "I tell you what it is, my dear, this man wants to marry you. That is the meaning of all these presents. There is nothing for it but to go and pay him a visit in person. He must be a man of immense wealth, and as he is so devoted to you, perhaps you might do worse than marry him." The princess agreed with all her father said, and orders were issued for vast numbers of elephants and camels and gorgeous tents and flags, and litters for the ladies, and horses for the men to be prepared without delay. For the king and the princess were going to pay a visit to the great and magnificent Prince Wali Dad. Now the merchant at the king's command was to guide the party. Now the feelings of the poor merchant in his sore dilemma can hardly be imagined. Willingly would he have run away, but he was treated with so much hospitality as Wali Dad's representative that he hardly got an instant's peace and never an opportunity of slipping away. In fact, after a few days, despair possessed him to such a degree, he made up his mind that it was fate and escape was impossible. Yet he hoped devoutly that some turn of fortune would reveal a way out of the difficulties which, with the best intentions, he had drawn upon himself. On the 7th day they started amidst thunderous salutes from the city ramparts and much dust, cheering and blaring of trumpets. Day after day they moved on, and each day the poor merchant felt more miserable. He wondered what kind of death the king would invent for him, and he went through almost as much torture lying awake at night, thinking over his situation as he would have suffered if the king's executioners were already setting to work upon his neck. At last, they were only one day's march from Wali Dad's little mud house. Here a great encampment was made, and the merchant was sent on to tell Wali Dad that the king and princess of Kaistan had arrived and were seeking an interview. The merchant found Wali Dad eating his evening meal of onions and dry bread, and when he told him of all that had happened, he had not the heart also to reproach him. For Wali Dad was overwhelmed with grief and shame for himself as well as for his friend and for the name and honor of the princess. And he wept and plucked at his beard and groaned most piteously. With tears he begged the merchant to detain them for one day with any excuse he could think of, and to come back the next morning to discuss what they should do. As soon as the merchant was gone, Wali Dad made up his mind that there was only one honorable way out of the shame he had created by his foolishness, and this was to kill himself. So without stopping to ask anyone's advice, he went off in the middle of the night to a place where the river ran at the base of steep, rocky cliffs, determined to throw himself over and put an end to his life. When he got there, he drew back a few paces, took a little run. Then, at the very edge of that dreadful black gulf, he stopped short. He could not do it. From below, unseen in the blackness of night, the water roared and boiled round the jagged rocks. He could picture the place as he knew it, now 10 times more pitiless and forbidding in the darkness. The wind rushed through the gorge with fearsome moans and whisperings, and the bushes and grasses that grew on the cliffs seemed to him like living creatures that danced and beckoned, shadowy and indistinct. An owl laughed, "Hoo, hoo," almost in his face as he peered over the edge of the gulf, and the old man recoiled, bathed in horror. He drew away, shuddering, and covering his face in his hands. He wept aloud. Presently he was aware of a gentle radiance close by. Surely morning was not yet come to hasten and reveal his disgrace. He took his hands away from his face and saw 2 lovely beings who, his instinct told him, were not mortal but perished from paradise. "Why do you weep, old man?" said one. Her voice was clear and musical as that of the bulbul. "I weep for shame," he replied. "What are you doing here?" said the other. "I came here to die," said Wali Dad. And as they questioned him, he confessed his whole story. When he had told all, the first Peri stepped forward and laid a hand upon his shoulder. Now Wali Dad began to feel that something strange, he did not know what, was happening to him. His old cotton rags had become beautiful linen and embroidered cloth. On his calloused feet he felt warm, soft shoes. On his head was a great jeweled turban. Round his neck lay a heavy golden chain, and the little old grass-cutting sickle he wore in his waistband had turned into a gorgeous scimitar whose ivory hilt gleamed like snow in moonlight. As he stood and wondered, like a man in a dream, the other Peri waved her hand and bade him turn his head. Lo, before him a noble gateway stood open to an avenue of giant plane trees. Up this avenue the Peris led him, dumb with amazement, and at the end of the avenue, on the very spot where his hut had stood, a shining palace appeared, ablaze with light. Its great porticos and verandas were occupied by hurrying servants, and guards paced to and fro and saluted him respectfully as he approached along the mossy walks and wide green lawns where fountains played and flowers scented the air. At last Wali Dad stood before the palace, stunned and helpless. "Fear not," said one of the Peris. "Go to your house and learn that God rewards the simple-hearted." With these words they both disappeared and left him. He walked into the palace, still thinking that he must be dreaming, and retired to rest in a splendid room, far grander than any he had ever dreamed of. When he woke at dawn, he found that the palace and his servants were all real, and that he was not dreaming after all. If Wali Dad was dumbfounded, the merchant, who was ushered into his presence soon after sunrise, was even more so. He told Wali Dad that he had not slept all night, and he had started at dawn to seek him. What a search he had had. A great stretch of wild country had changed in the night to parks and gardens, and had it not been for some of Wali Dad's new servants who brought him to the palace, he would have fled thinking that his troubles had driven him mad, and that what he had seen was only a hallucination. Now then Wali Dad told the merchant all that had happened. On the merchant's advice, he sent an invitation to the king and princes of Khaistan, together with all their retinue, down to the very humblest servant. For 3 nights and days a great feast was held in honor of the royal guests. Each evening the king and his nobles were served on golden plates and with golden cups, those of lesser rank on silver plates and with silver cups, and each time the guests were requested to keep the plates and cups as a remembrance. Never had anything so splendid been seen besides the feasting. There were sports and hunting, dances, and amusements of all kinds. On the fourth day, the king of Castan took his host aside and asked him whether it was true, as he suspected, that Wali Dad wished to marry his daughter. Wali Dad, after thanking him very much for the compliment, said that he had never dreamed of so great an honor and that he was far too old and ugly for so fair a lady. But he begged the king to stay with him until he could send for the Prince of Nekabad, who was a most excellent, brave, and honorable young man, and would surely be delighted to win the hand of the beautiful princess. To this the king agreed, and Wali Dad sent the merchant to Nekabad with a number of attendants, and with such handsome presents that the prince came at once, fell head over ears in love with the princess, and married her in Wali Dad's palace amidst great rejoicing. After this, the king of Castan and the prince and princess of Nekabad went back to their own countries. As for Wali Dad, he lived to a good old age, befriending all who were in trouble and preserving in his prosperity the simple-hearted and generous nature that had been his when he had been only Wali Dad Gunji, the grass cutter. All right, y'all, this one here is called The Crow Fairy. Now, fairy tales from Turkey often have more Western characteristics than Asian, with a few exceptions. Now, the Crow Fairy is not one of the exceptions. It is direct and practical in its action, materialistic and immediate in its rewards. The only sign of Asian symbolism and animism is the ease with which human beings slip in and out of animal bodies, it being always understood, of course, that to be in a beast's body is less fortunate than to be in a human one. The crow, usually considered a mischievous and even an evil bird in fairy tales, appears here in the guise of a beauty and goodness, and is properly rewarded by resuming her human shape and marrying the prince. Now let's get on with the story. Once upon a time, there was a man who had an only son. This man used to go out into the forest all day and catch birds for his livelihood. At last, however, he died, and the son was left all alone. One day he took his father's bird snare into the forest and set the snare on a tree. At that moment a crow flew down, and as it was cunningly laid, the poor bird was caught. The youth climbed up the tree, but the crow began begging him to let her go, promising to give him in exchange something more beautiful and more precious than herself. She begged and prayed till at last he let her go free. Then again he set the snare and sat down at the foot of the tree to wait. Presently another bird came and flew right into the snare. The youth climbed up again and stopped in amazement, for he had never seen such a beautiful bird before. While he was still gazing at it in awe, the crow again appeared and said to him, "Take that bird to the padishah, and he will buy it from you." The youth put the bird in a cage and carried it to the palace. When the padishah saw the beautiful little creature, he was filled with joy, and he gave the youth so much money that he hardly knew what to do with it all. They placed the bird in a golden cage, and the padishah took pleasure in it day and night. Now the padishah had a counselor who was jealous of the youth who had brought the bird, and he kept cudgeling his brain for a way to bring about his downfall. At last he hit upon a plan. Going to the padishah one day, he said how happy that bird would be if only he had an ivory palace to dwell in. "Yes," replied the padishah, "but where could I get enough ivory to build a palace?" "He who brought the bird," said the counselor, "will certainly be able to find the ivory." The padishah sent for the youth and bade him make an ivory palace for the bird then and there. "Alas, my lord padishah," lamented the youth, "where am I to get all this ivory?" "That is your affair," replied the padishah. "You may have 40 days to search for it, but if it is not here by then, Your head shall be where now your feet are." The youth was sorely troubled, and while he was still pondering which road to take, the crow came flying up and asked what he was grieving about. Then the youth told her what great trouble the little bird had brought upon him. "Why, this is nothing at all to fret about," said the crow. "Go and ask the padishah for 40 wagon loads of wine." The youth returned to the palace, was given the wine, and as he was coming back with the wagons, the crow flew up again. "Nearby is a forest," she said, "and on the border are 40 large trenches. As many elephants as there are in the wide world come to drink out of these trenches. Go now and fill them with wine instead of water. The elephants will get drunk and tumble down, and you will be able to draw their tusks and take them to the padishah." The youth did as the bird said, loaded the wagons with elephants' tusks, and returned with them to the palace. Now the padishah rejoiced greatly at the sight of all the ivory. He had the palace built, rewarded the youth with rich gifts, and sent him home. The sparkling bird lived in his ivory palace and merrily hopped about from perch to perch, but he could never be made to sing. "Ah," said the evil counselor, "if only his master were here, he would sing freely." "Who knows who his master is or where he is to be found?" said the padishah sadly. "He who fetched the elephant's tusks could fetch the bird's master also," replied the evil counselor. Again the padishah sent for the youth and commanded him to bring the bird's master before him. "How can I tell who his master is when I caught him by chance in the forest?" said the youth. "That is your affair," said the padishah. "But if you do not find him, I will slay you. I give you 40 days for your quest, and let that suffice." The youth went home and sobbed aloud in his despair, when lo, the crow came flying and asked why he was crying. "Why should I not cry?" said the poor youth, and began to tell the crow of his new trouble. "Nay, it is a shame to weep for such a trifle," said the crow. "Go quickly to the padishah and ask him for a ship, but it must be large enough to hold 40 maidservants, a beautiful garden, and a bathing pool." The youth returned to the padishah and told him what he needed for his journey. The ship was prepared and the youth embarked. He was just wondering where to go when the crow came flying up. "Steer your ship to the east and sail straight until you perceive a huge mountain. At the foot of this mountain dwell 40 Peris, and when they see your ship, they will feel a strong desire to look at everything on it. But you must allow only their queen to come on board, for she is the owner of the bird. And while you are showing her the ship, set sail and never stop until you reach home." The youth steered steadily to the east and never stopped until he came to the mountain. There were the 40 Peris walking on the shore, and when they saw the ship, they all came rushing up to look at it. The queen of the Peris asked the youth to show her the ship, especially the inside of it. And so he picked her up in a little skiff and brought her on board. The Peri was delighted with the beautiful ship. She walked in its garden and with the maidservants, and when she saw the bathing pool, she said, "Since I have come so far, I may as well bathe." With that, she stepped into the pool, and while she was bathing, the ship sailed off. When the Peri had finished bathing, she stepped out on deck and saw nothing but the sea around her. At this, she fell to weeping bitterly. What was to become of her, and where was she bound? Into whose hands was she about to fall? But the youth comforted her, saying that she was going to a king's palace and would be among good people. Not very long afterward, they landed, and he sent word to the padishah. Then he brought the Peri to him, and as she passed by the ivory palace of the bird, it began to sing so beautifully that all who heard it were beside themselves with joy. The Peri was comforted when she heard it, but the padishah was filled with rapture, for he instantly fell in love with the beautiful Peri and could not be without her a single moment. The wedding banquet quickly followed, and with the beautiful Peri on his right hand and the sparkling bird on his left, There was not a happier man in the world than the padishah. But the poison of envy still devoured the soul of the evil counselor. One day, however, the new sultana suddenly fell ill and took to her bed. Every remedy was tried, but the sages said that nothing would cure her except the drug which was in her own fairy palace. Then, on the advice of the evil counselor, the youth was again summoned to the palace and commanded to go and fetch the drug. Once more the youth embarked on his ship and was just about to sail when the crow came to him. The youth told her his errand. "Well then go," said the crow, "and you will find the palace behind a mountain. 2 lions stand at the gates, but take this feather and touch their muzzles with it, and they will not lift so much as a claw against you." The youth took the feather, arrived at the mountain, disembarked, and quickly beheld the palace. He went straight up to the gates, and there stood the 2 lions. He took out his feather, and no sooner had he touched their muzzles than they lay down and let him enter. The Peris also saw the youth and guessed that their queen was ill. So they gave him the drug, and immediately he set sail again and returned home. He entered the chamber with the drug in his hand and the crow on his shoulder, and went directly to the sultana's bedside. The sultana was already in the throes of death, but no sooner had she tasted the healing drug than she seemed to return to life at a single bound. She opened her eyes, gazed at the youth, and perceived the crow on his shoulder. "Oh, you slave," she said to the crow, "are you not sorry for all this that this youth has suffered on your account?" Then the sultana told her lord, the padishah, that this same crow was her serving maid, whom she had changed into a crow because of her negligence. "Nevertheless," she said, "I now forgive her, for I see that her intentions were good." At these words the crow trembled all over, and immediately there stood before the youth a damsel so lovely that there was really very little difference between her and the queen of the Peri. On the sultana's petition, the padishah married the youth to the crow Peri. The evil counselor was banished. The youth became vizier in his place, and he and his bride lived happily all their lives. All right, y'all, this one here is called The Death of Koshai the Deathless. Now, the hero of this fairy tale from Russia is a young prince who had the responsibility, when his father died, of finding husbands for his 3 sisters. When this was accomplished, he found a wife for himself. How he lost her, how the search occupied his life, how he found help from strange sources. But read the story for yourself and find out who Koshai the Deathless was, and how he died, and how the prince found his wife again. In a certain kingdom, there once lived a prince, Ivan, who had 3 sisters. Now the first was the princess Maria, the second the princess Olga, and the third the princess Anna. When their father and mother lay at the point of death, they called their son and commanded him, "Give your sisters in marriage to the very first suitors who come to woo them. Don't keep them with you." His father and mother died, and the prince buried them, and then, to solace his grief, he went strolling with his sisters in the green garden. Now suddenly the sky was covered by a black cloud, and a terrible storm arose. "Let us go home, my sisters," he cried. Hardly had they got into the palace when the thunder pealed, the ceiling split open, and into the room there flew a falcon. The falcon struck upon the ground, became a brave youth, and said, "Hail, Prince Ivan! Once I came as a guest, but now I have come as a wooer. I wish to marry your sister, the Princess Maria. If you find favor in the eyes of my sister, I will not interfere with her wishes. She may marry you with God's blessing." The Princess Maria gave her consent, and the falcon married her and bore her away into his own realm. Days followed days, hours chased hours, and whole year passed by. One day, Prince Ivan and his two sisters went strolling in their beautiful green garden. Again there arose a storm cloud with whirlwind and lightning. "Let us go home, my sisters," cried the prince. Scarcely had they entered the palace when thunder crashed, lightning hit the roof, the ceiling split in two, and in flew an eagle. The eagle struck upon the ground and became a brave youth. "Hail, Prince Ivan! Once I came as a guest, but now I have come as a wooer." And he asked for the hand of the princess. He asked for the hand of the Princess Olga. Prince Ivan replied, "If you find favor in the eyes of the Princess Olga, then let her marry you. I will not interfere with her wishes." The Princess Olga gave her consent and married the eagle. The eagle took her and carried her off to his own kingdom. Another year went by. Prince Ivan said to his youngest sister, "Let us go out and stroll in the green garden." They walked about for a time. Again there arose a storm cloud with whirlwind and lightning. "Let us return home, sisters," said he. They returned home, but they had scarcely had time to sit down when the thunder crashed. The ceiling split open, and in flew a raven. The raven struck upon the floor and became a brave youth. The two other youths had been handsome, but this one was handsomest of all. "Hail, Prince Ivan! Once I came as a guest, but now I have come as a wooer. Give me the Princess Anna for my wife. I won't interfere with my sister's freedom. If you gain her affections, she may marry you." So the Princess Anna married the raven, and he bore her away into his own realm. Then Prince Ivan was left alone, and he sorely missed his sister's companionship. After a year, he said, "I will set out and visit them." He got ready for the journey, and then he set off. He rode and rode for a number of days until he came to a large encampment in the plain. He cried aloud, "I am the Prince Ivan. Who is the ruler here?" A huntsman replied, "This is the hunting party of the fair Princess Maria Morevna." Princess Ivan rode farther on until he came to a white tent, and out came the fair Princess Maria Morevna. "Hail, Prince," she said. "Whither does God send you? And do you go freely or against your will?" No brave man rides against his will," Prince Ivan replied. "Well, if your business is not pressing, stay with me a while." Then Prince Ivan was very happy. He spent 2 nights in her camp and found favor in the eyes of Maria Morevna, and she married him. Then he and the fair princess went off to her own realm. There they lived together until one day the princess decided to go hunting again. So she handed over all the housekeeping affairs to Prince Ivan and gave him instructions. "Go about everywhere. Keep watch over everything. Only you must never look into that closet there." He could not help doing so, however. The moment Maria Morevna had gone, he rushed to the closet, pulled open the door, and looked in. There was Koshai, the deathless, fettered by 12 chains. "Water! Give me water," he begged. The prince gave him a bucket of water, which he gulped down. Then Koshai again entreated Prince Ivan, saying, "A single bucket of water will not quench my thirst. Give me more." The prince gave him a second bucketful. Koshai drank it up and asked for a third. And when he had swallowed it, he regained his former strength, gave his chains a shake, and broke all 12 at once. "Thanks, Prince Ivan," cried Koshai the deathless. "Now you will sooner see your own ears than Maria Morevna." Out the window he flew in the shape of a terrible whirlwind, and he caught up with the fair Princess Maria Marevna, laid hold of her, and carried her off home with him. Prince Ivan wept at her loss and arrayed himself to search for her, saying, "Whatever happens, I will find Maria Marevna." One day passed, then another. At the dawn of the third day, he saw a wondrous palace, and by the side of the palace stood an oak, and on the oak sat a falcon. Down flew the falcon from the oak, struck upon the ground, turned into a brave youth, and cried aloud, "Welcome, dear brother-in-law. How goes it with you?" And his wife, the Princess Maria, came joyfully running to greet her brother Ivan. She inquired after him and told him all about herself. Now the prince spent 3 days with them. Then he said, "I cannot stay with you. I must go in search of my wife, the fair Princess Maria Marevna." "It will be hard for you to find her," answered the falcon. "Leave us your silver spoon. We will look at it and remember you." So Prince Ivan gave them his silver spoon and went on his way again. One day passed, and then another. By the dawn of the third day, he saw a palace still grander than the first, and near the palace stood an oak, and on the oak sat an eagle. Down flew the eagle from the oak, struck upon the ground, turned into a brave youth, and cried aloud, "Come out, Princess Olga. Here is our dear brother." The Princess Olga immediately ran to meet him and began kissing and embracing him, asking after him and telling him all about herself. Now Prince Ivan stayed with them 3 days. Then he said, "I cannot stay any longer. I must go and look for my wife, the fair Princess Maria Marevna." "It will be hard for you to find her," replied the eagle. "Leave us your silver fork. We will look at it and remember you." So Prince Ivan gave them his silver fork and went his way. He traveled 1 day, he traveled 2 days. At daybreak on the third day, he saw a palace grander than the first two, and near the palace stood an oak, and on the oak sat a raven. Down flew the raven from the oak, struck upon the ground, turned into a brave youth, and cried aloud, "Princess Anna, come quickly. Our brother is here." Out ran the Princess Anna, who greeted him joyfully and began kissing and embracing him, asking after him and telling him all about herself. Now Prince Ivan stayed with them 3 days. Then he said, "Farewell. I am going to look for my wife, the fair Princess Maria Marevna." "It will be hard for you to find her," replied the raven. "Anyhow, leave us your silver snuff box. We will look at it and remember you." The prince handed over his silver snuff box, took his leave, and went his way. Now 1 day passed, and another, and on the third day he came to where Maria Marevna was. She caught sight of her love, flung her arms around his neck, burst into tears, and exclaimed, "Oh, Prince Ivan, why did you disobey me and go looking into the closet and letting out Koshchei the Deathless? Forgive me, Maria Marevna. Never mind the past. Fly with me while Koshchei the Deathless is out of sight. Perhaps he won't catch us." And so they fled. Now Koshchei was out hunting. Toward evening, as he was returning home, his good steed stumbled beneath him. "Why are you stumbling, wretched beast? Do you scent some ill deed?" The steed replied, "Prince Ivan has come and carried off Maria Marevna. Is it possible to catch them? It is possible to sow wheat, to wait till it grows, to reap and thresh it, to grind it to flour, to make 5 pies of it, to eat those pies, and then to start in pursuit, and even then to be in time." Koshchei galloped off and caught up with Prince Ivan. "Now," said he, "this time I will forgive you in return for your kindness in giving me water to drink. And a second time I will forgive you, but the third time beware, for then I will cut you to bits. Then he took Marya Morevna away from the prince and carried her off. Prince Ivan sat down dejectedly on a stone and wept. He thought and thought, and then he went back to find Marya Morevna. Again, Koshchei the Deathless happened not to be at home. "Let us fly, Marya Morevna." "Alas, Prince Ivan, he will catch us." "Suppose he does catch us. At least we shall have spent a few hours together." So they got ready and fled. As Koshchei the Deathless was returning home, his good steed stumbled beneath him. "Why do you stumble, wretched beast? Do you scent some ill deed?" "Prince Ivan has come and carried off Marya Morevna." "Is it possible to catch them?" "It is possible to sow barley, to wait till it grows, to reap and thresh it, to brew beer, to drink ourselves drunk on it, to sleep our fill, and then to set off in pursuit, and yet be in time." Koshchei galloped off and caught up with Prince Ivan. "Didn't I tell you that you would sooner see your own ears than Marya Morevna?" And he took her away and carried her off home with him. Now Prince Ivan was left alone. At first he wept, then he went back again after Marya Morevna. Koshchei happened to be away from home at that moment. "Let us fly, Marya Morevna." "Ah, Prince Ivan, he is sure to catch us and chop you in pieces. Let him chop away. I cannot live without you." So they got ready and fled. Koshchei the Deathless was returning home when his good steed stumbled beneath him. "Why do you stumble? Do you scent ill deed?" "Prince Ivan has come and has carried off Marya Morevna." Koshchei galloped off, caught Prince Ivan, chopped him into little pieces, put them into a barrel, smeared it with pitch, bound it with iron hoops, and flung it into the deep blue sea. But Marya Morevna he carried off home. At that very moment, the silver articles which Prince Ivan had left with his brothers-in-law all turned black. "Ah," they said, "the evil deed is surely done." Then the eagle hurried to the blue sea, caught hold of the barrel, and dragged it ashore. The falcon flew away for the water of life, and the raven for the water of death. Afterward, they all three met, broke open the barrel, took out the remains of Prince Ivan, washed them, and put them together in fitting order. Now the raven sprinkled them with the water of death. The pieces became joined together. The body became whole. The falcon sprinkled it with the water of life. Prince Ivan shuddered, stood up, and said, "Ah, what a long time I've been sleeping." You'd have gone on sleeping a good deal longer if it hadn't been for us," replied his brothers-in-law. "Now come and pay us a visit." "Not so, brothers. I shall go and look for Marya Morevna." And when he had found her, he said to her, "Find out from Koshchei the Deathless whence he got so good a steed." So Marya Morevna chose a favorable moment and asked Koshchei about it. And Koshchei replied, "Beyond thrice 9 lands, in the 30th kingdom on the other side of the fiery river, there lives a Baba Yaga. She has so good a mare that she flies right round the world on it every day. And she has many other splendid ones. I watched over her herds for 3 days without losing a single mare. And in return for that, the Baba Yaga gave me a foal." "But how did you get across the fiery river?" "Why, I have a handkerchief. When I wave it thrice with my right hand, there springs up a very lofty bridge, and the fire cannot reach it." And he showed her the handkerchief. Now Marya Morevna listened to all this, then went and repeated it to Prince Ivan. And while Koshchei was sleeping, she carried off the handkerchief and gave it to him. So Prince Ivan managed to get across the fiery river and then rode on to the Baba Yaga's. He went on for a long time without having anything to eat or to drink. At last, he came across a wild bird and its young ones. Prince Ivan said, "I'll eat one of these chickens." "Don't eat it, Prince Ivan," begged the outlandish bird. "Sometime or other I'll do you a good turn." He went on farther and saw a hive of bees in the forest. "I'll get a bit of honeycomb," he said. "Don't disturb my honey, Prince Ivan," cried the queen bee. "Sometime or other I'll do you a good turn." So he left it and went on. Presently he met a lioness with her cub. "I think I'll eat this lion cub," he said. "I'm so hungry I feel quite weak." "Please let us alone, Prince Ivan," begged the lioness. "Sometime or other I'll do you a good turn." "Very well, have it your way, have it your own way," said he. Hungry and faint, he wandered on, walking farther and farther, and at last he came to the house of the Baba Yaga. Around the house were 12 poles in a circle, and on each of 11 of these poles was stuck a human head. The 12th alone remained unoccupied. "Hail to you, Granny!" "Hail to you, Prince Ivan! Why have you come? Is it of your own accord or on compulsion?" "I have come to earn a fine steed from you." "So be it, Prince. You won't have to serve a year with me, but just 3 days. If you take good care of my mares, I'll give you a fine steed. But if you don't, why, then you mustn't be annoyed at finding your head stuck on top of the last pole up there." Prince Ivan agreed to these terms. The Baba Yaga gave him food and drink and bade him set about his business. But the moment he had driven the mares afield, they cocked up their tails and away they tore across the meadows in all directions. Before the prince had time to look around, they were all out of sight. Thereupon he began to bewail his fate. Then, being very tired, he sat down upon a stone and went to sleep. When the sun was near its setting, a bird came flying up and awakened him, saying, "Arise, Prince Ivan. The mares are at home now." The prince arose and returned to the Baba Yaga. There she was, storming and raging at her mares and shrieking, "Whatever did you come home for?" "How could we help it?" they said. "Birds came flying from every part of the world, and they all but pecked our eyes out." "Well, tomorrow, don't you go galloping over the meadows, but disperse into the thick forests." Prince Ivan slept all night. In the morning, the Baba Yaga said to him, "Mind, Prince, if you don't take good care of the mares, if you lose even one, your bold head will be stuck on that pole." He drove the mares afield. Immediately they cocked up their tails and dispersed into the thick forest. Again the prince sat down on the stone, not knowing what to do, and then went to sleep. The sun sank behind the forest. Up came a lioness. "Arise, Prince Ivan. The mares are all collected and have gone home." Prince Ivan arose and went back to Baba Yaga, who was storming at her mares more than ever and shrieking, "Whatever did you come back home for? How could we help it? Beasts of prey came running at us from all parts of the world and all but tore us utterly to pieces. Well, tomorrow run off into the blue sea." Again Prince Ivan slept through the night. Next morning the Baba Yaga sent him out to watch the mares. "If you don't take good care of them," she said, "your bold head will be stuck on that pole." He drove the mares afield. Immediately they cocked up their tails, disappeared from sight, and fled into the blue sea. There they stood, up to their necks in water. Prince Ivan sat down on the stone and wept until he fell asleep. But when the sun had set behind the forest, a bee flew up and said, "Arise, Prince. The mares are all collected. But when you get back, don't let the Baba Yaga set eyes on you, but go into the stable and hide behind the stalls. There you will find a young colt rolling in the mud. You must steal it, and in the dead of night ride away from the house." Prince Ivan arose, slipped into the stable, and lay down behind the stalls while the Baba Yaga was storming away at her mares and shrieking, "Why did you come back? How could we help it? Bees came flying in countless numbers from all parts of the world and began stinging us till we bled." Baba Yaga went to sleep. In the dead of night, Prince Ivan stole the young colt, saddled it, jumped on his back, and galloped away toward the fiery river. When he got there, he waved the handkerchief 3 times with his right hand, and suddenly, springing from goodness knows where, a splendid bridge hung across the river, high in the air. The prince rode across the bridge and waved the handkerchief again, this time twice, with his left hand. Now there remained only an ever so thin bridge. When the Baba Yaga got up in the morning, the young colt was not to be seen. Off she set in pursuit. She flew at full speed in her iron mortar, urging it on with the pestle, sweeping away her traces with a broom. She dashed up to the fiery river, looked at it, and said, "What a fine bridge." She drove onto it, but had only got halfway across when the thin bridge broke in two, and the Baba Yaga went flop into the river. There she met with a cruel death. Prince Ivan fattened up the colt in the green meadows, and it turned into a wondrous steed. Then he rode to where Marya Morevna was. She came running out and threw her arms around his neck, crying, "By what miracle has God brought you back to life?" "I think now we have a chance to escape," he said. "Come along with me." "I'm afraid, Prince Ivan, if Koshchei catches us, you will be cut in pieces again." "No, he won't catch us. I have a splendid, fine steed now. It flies like a bird." So they got on its back and rode away. Koshchei the Deathless was returning home when his horse stumbled beneath him. "What are you stumbling for, wretched beast? Do you scent in any ill deed?" Prince Ivan has come and carried off Marya Morevna. Can we catch them?" "God knows. Prince Ivan has a horse now which is better than I." "Well, I won't stand for that," said Koshchei the Deathless. "I will pursue." After a time he overtook Prince Ivan, leapt to the ground, and was about to chop him up with his sharp sword. But at that moment Prince Ivan's horse smote Koshchei the Deathless full swing with its hoof, cracking his skull, and the prince made an end of him with a club. Afterward the prince heaped up a pile of wood, set fire to it, burned Koshchei the Deathless on the pyre, and scattered his ashes to the wind. Then Marya Morevna mounted Koshchei's horse, and Prince Ivan got on his own, and they rode away to visit first the raven, and then the eagle, and then the falcon. Wherever they went, they met with a joyful greeting. "Welcome, Prince Ivan. We never expected to see you alive again." "Well, now at last your troubles are over, but they were well worth it. One might search the world over for such a beauty as Marya Morevna, and never find her like." And so they visited, and they feasted, and afterward Prince Ivan and Princess Marya Morevna rode home and lived happily in their own realm. All right, y'all, this one here is called The Maiden with the Wooden Helmet. Now, the trials that beset a beautiful girl anywhere in the world are very faithfully described in this brief Japanese tale. This particular maiden, obeying her dead mother, protected herself in a unique fashion, and might have lived alone the rest of her life had it not been for a moment of disobedience, when her beauty was revealed and a young man happened to pass by. Now, in a little village long, long ago, there lived a man and his wife. For many years they were happy and prosperous, but bad times came, and at last they had nothing left but their daughter, who was as beautiful as the morning. Now, the neighbors were very kind and would have done anything they could to help their poor friends, but the old couple felt that since everything had changed, they would rather go elsewhere. So one day they set off to bury themselves in the country, taking their daughter with them. Now the mother and daughter had plenty to do to keep the house clean and look after the garden, but the man would sit for hours on end, gazing straight in front of him and thinking of the riches he had lost. Each day he grew more and more wretched until at length he took to his bed and never got up again. His wife and daughter wept bitterly, and it was many months before they could take pleasure in anything. Then one morning, the mother suddenly looked at the girl and found that she had grown still lovelier than before. Once her heart would have been glad at the sight, but now that they were alone in the world, she feared some harm might come of it. So, like a good mother, she tried to teach her daughter and to bring her up to be always busy so that she would never have time to think about herself. The daughter was a good girl and listened to all her mother's advice, and so the years passed. One wet spring, the mother caught cold, and though in the beginning she did not pay much attention to it, she gradually grew more and more ill, and at last, she knew that she had not long to live. She called her daughter and told her that very soon she would be alone in the world, and that she must look after herself. And because it is more difficult for beautiful women to pass unheeded than for plain ones, she bade her fetch a wooden helmet out of the next room and put it on her head to cover her hair, and pull it down over her brows so that nearly the whole of her face should lie in its shadow. The girl did as she was bid, and her beauty was so hidden beneath the wooden cap that she might have gone through any crowd and no one would have looked twice at her. And when the mother saw this, her heart was at rest, and she lay back in her bed and died. The girl wept for many days, and by she felt that she must go out and find work, for she had only herself to depend on. There was nothing to be gained by staying where she was, so she tied her clothes into a bundle and walked over the hills till she reached the house of the man who owned the fields in that part of the country. She took service with him and labored early and late, and every night when she went to bed she was at peace, for she had not forgotten one thing she had promised her mother. However hot the sun might be, she always kept the wooden helmet on her head, and the people gave her the nickname of Hardhead. Nevertheless, in spite of all her care, the fame of her beauty spread abroad. Many of the impudent young men that are always to be found in the world stole softly up behind her while she was at work and tried to lift off the wooden helmet. But the girl would have nothing to say to them and only bade them be off. When they began to talk to her, she never answered. She never answered them, but went on with what she was doing. One day her master happened to pass through the field where she was working, and struck by her industry, stopped to watch her. After a while, he asked her a few questions and then led her into the house and told her that henceforward her only duty should be to tend his sick wife. Although the girl felt as if all her troubles were ended, the worst was yet to come. Not long after, the eldest son of the house returned home from town, where he had been studying all sorts of things. He was tired of splendors and treasures, and was glad enough to be back in the green country among the peach blossom. Now strolling about in the early morning, he caught sight of the girl with the odd wooden helmet on her head, and immediately he went to ask his mother who she was, where she came from, and why she wore that strange thing over her face. His mother answered that it was a whim, and that nobody could persuade her to lay it aside. The young man laughed, but kept his thoughts to himself. Now one hot day, however, he happened to be going toward home when he caught sight of his mother's maid kneeling by a little stream that flowed through the garden, splashing some water over her face. Now the helmet was pushed to the side, and as the youth watched from behind a tree, he had a glimpse of the girl's great beauty, and he determined that she should be his wife. But when he told his family of his resolve, they were very angry and made up all sorts of wicked stories about her. They might have spared themselves the trouble, however, for he knew it was only idle talk. I have merely to remain firm, he thought, and they will have to give in. It was such a good match for the girl that it never occurred to anyone that she would refuse the young man. But so she did. It would not be right, she felt, to make a quarrel in the house, and though in secret she wept bitterly for a long while, nothing the young man said would make her change her mind. At length, one night her mother appeared to her in a dream and bade her marry the young man. So the next time he asked her, as he did nearly every day, to his surprise and joy, she consented. The parents saw they had better make the best of a bad business, and they set about making the grand preparations suitable to the occasion. Of course, the neighbors said a great many ill-natured things about the wooden helmet, but the bridegroom was too happy to care. When everything was ready for the feast, and the bride was dressed in the most beautiful embroidered dress to be found, the maids took hold of the helmet to lift it off her head so that they might do her hair in the latest fashion. But the helmet would not come off, and the harder they pulled, the faster it seemed to be, until the poor girl cried out with pain. The bridegroom ran in and soothed her, and he declared that she should be married in the helmet, as she could not be married without. Then the ceremonies began. The bridal pair sat together and drank the ceremonial cup of wine together. And when the cup was empty, a wonderful thing happened. The helmet suddenly burst with a loud noise and fell in pieces on the ground. And as all looked, they saw that the floor was covered with precious stones which had fallen from it. But the guests were less astonished at the diamonds than at the beauty of the bride, which was beyond anything they had ever seen or imagined. The night was passed in singing and dancing, and then the bride and bridegroom went to their own house. There they lived till they died, and they had many children who were famous throughout the land for their goodness and beauty.